Class 9th, in our previous video, we had finished Act 2, Scene 2. Though the syllabus of Merchant of Venice is not yet finished, but we have to start the another book also, that is Treasure Trove, short stories and poem also. Okay, so in today's video we will do the poetry session. We'll start a new poem, that is After Blenheim. Okay, and rest of the syllabus for Merchant of Venice and short stories will complete side by side. So in this class I'll teach you about the very nice poem, that is a very good poem. You will come to know, when you will go through this poem, you'll come to know about the horror or the destruction of war, the destructive side of war. Okay, that is After Blenheim. Okay, After Blenheim. This poem is written by, that is Robert Southey. Who has written this poem? Robert Southey. And the poem is set at the site of, that is the Battle of Blenheim, which was fought in the year of 1704. Okay. In this poem, you will come to know that two children, grandchildren of old Casper. Casper is the grandfather. Okay, two children, they put up very innocent questions, okay, to their father, to their grandfather, who was unable to give the satisfactory answer, or who was unable to satisfy them. Okay, how he was not able to give the proper answer as they asked the question related to the war. Okay, and he tells them about the casualties of the war, that is burned homes also, civilian casualties, dead bodies, rotting dead bodies, and another destructive side of war. But he was unsuccessful, or he was not able to give the proper satisfactory answer to his grandchildren, that why the war happens. Okay, why the war is fought. Clear? So let us read the poem. Let us come to know who are the two grandchildren and what question they ask to their grandfather, and what advantages, okay, what advantages he tells of about the war, and what disadvantages are there when the countries, okay, involve themselves against any of the country. Okay, when the war takes place, okay, what happens. Let us read the poem, and please listen to the explanations very carefully.
That took place in 1704 in a village named Blenheim in Bavaria, which is in the south of Germany. It was fought between England and France, and in the end, England won. Summary of the poem. It is a summer evening, and old Caspar is sitting outside his cottage door. His two grandchildren, Wilhelmine and Peterkin, are playing. Now Peterkin finds an object and brings it to Caspar, asking him what it is. Old Caspar says it's a human skull, the skull of a soldier who fell in the Great Victory. Then his grandchildren ask him about the war. Caspar tells them all about the war and repeats that it was a great victory. The children disagree with him and ask him what was so great about it, what good came out of it. Caspar is unable to answer. He merely repeats that it was a famous victory. It was a summer evening. Old Caspar's work was done, and he before his cottage door was sitting in the sun, and by him sported on the green his little grandchild Wilhelmine. The poem opens to a narrative that tells us that after finishing his work for the day, old Caspar, who is a farmer, was sitting outside his cottage door, relaxing in the evening sunshine. It was summertime. Next to him, there was a patch of land covered with green grass, and his little grandchild, Wilhelmine, was playing there. So we see that the setting is ideal. It is comfortable, cozy, peaceful, and pleasant. Now, suddenly in this idyllic setting, there is an occurrence which we shall see in the next stanza. She saw her brother Peterkin roll something large and round, which he beside the rivulet in playing there had found. He came to ask what he had found that was so large and smooth and round. So Wilhelmine saw her brother Peterkin coming towards Caspar. He had something with him. He was rolling something large and round on the ground as he came. He had found this object beside the rivulet while he was playing there, but he did not know what it was. So he had come to Caspar to ask what this large, smooth, and round object was. Now, here we see that the poet creates suspense in the reader's minds. He does not directly state what it was. Instead, he describes it as large and smooth and round and makes it appear like a very casual object to be found accidentally by a little boy during playtime. Now, this and the fact that the boy was so innocent and unaware of the horrifying reality of the object, it creates a sharp contrast between the pleasant setting and the horrors of war that are going to be described in the poem shortly after. Old Caspar took it from the boy, who stood expectant by, and then the old man shook his head, and with a natural sigh, "'Tis some poor fellow's skull," said he, "who fell in the great victory." Old Caspar took it from the boy, who stood expectant by. Now Caspar the grandfather was quite old and he had experienced many things in his lifetime. He took the object from the boy, who was completely unaware and inexperienced. The boy stood expectantly, which means eagerly waiting for his grandfather to tell him what the object was. Now this line shows the faith which the young boy had in his grandfather's wisdom. And it also creates a sense of irony when we realize later in the poem that although his grandfather understands the horrors of war quite well, he is still not able to speak out against war. And then the old man shook his head. The old man took the object and immediately knew what it was. He felt sad. He shook his head and sighed involuntarily, feeling sorry because it was a human skull. He said that the skull belonged to some poor fellow, which means one of the many soldiers who were killed in the Great Victory. Great Victory here refers to the Battle of Blenheim. I find them in the garden, for there's many hereabout, and often when I go to plough, the plowshare turns them out. For many thousand men, said he, were slain in that great victory. Plowshare means the teeth of the plough. Now Caspar says that he regularly finds such skulls in the garden because so many are buried there. And even when he plows the field, it is a common occurrence to see skulls being brought up to the surface when the plowshare is turning up the soil. Along with the soil, the plowshare also turns out human skulls. Now the visual imagery is striking here. Why? Because the soil is plowed in order to make it ready for sowing crops. We plow the soil to eventually get nourishment from it. But what nourishment can one get from a field where so many dead people are buried? The poet reminds us that though the war took place long ago, the effects are still felt. The horrors cannot be buried away. They are bound to eventually tumble out. He goes on to say that not one or two, but many thousand men were slain, which means killed in that great victory. Now tell us what it was all about. Young Peterkin, he cries, and little Wilhelmine looks up with wonder-waiting eyes. Now tell us all about the war and what they fought each other for. We have seen in the previous stanzas that although the effects of war are horrifying, the old man still keeps calling it a great victory. And this is what makes his grandchildren eager to know all about the war. Young Peterkin is so excited that he cries out eagerly to his grandfather to tell him all about it. His sister, little Wilhelmine, too thinks that she is going to hear a fantastic story, which is why she looks up at Caspar with her eyes full of wonder, and she is waiting for him to begin the story. Peterkin then asks Caspar to tell them all about the war and also the reason for the war, what they fought each other for. It was the English, Caspar cried, who put the French to rout. But what they fought each other for, I could not well make out. But everybody said, quoth he, that it was a famous victory. Caspar cried. This means that Caspar became very excited thinking about the war and the famous victory. He enthusiastically informed the children about the war. He said that the war had been fought between the French and the English had defeated the French, but he could not understand why they fought each other. For what? However, Caspar quickly added that everybody said it was a famous victory. The poet uses the word but to signify that what the battle was about is neither remembered nor considered significant by the common man. The common man blindly follows what he is told without questioning. Caspar also says everybody said that it was a famous victory. Everybody here means the state propaganda as well as other commoners like him. My father lived at Blenheim then, yon little stream hard by. They burnt his dwelling to the ground and he was forced to fly. So with his wife and child he fled, nor had he where to rest his head. Yon means yonder, and hard by means quite near. Dwelling means house, and fly means run away. So Caspar was a child when the war was fought. He says that his father lived at Blenheim at that time near the little stream. The enemy forces set his house on fire and it was completely burned down. He was forced to run away with his wife and child, but they had to wander about with no shelter. Now, Caspar uses the words my father to convey that he himself was a child at that time, unable to take decisions. It was his father who was responsible for the family's safety and well being. Caspar's father ran away from Blenheim with his wife and child, but they could not find any place where they could get shelter. With fire and sword the country round was wasted far and wide, and many a childing mother then and newborn baby died. But things like that, must be at every famous victory. So fire and sword means burning and killing. Wasted means ruined, and childing means pregnant. So all around the country, even in the most far off places, war caused its destruction. Fields and houses were set on fire or bombed with cannons. People were killed with swords. The country suffered much death and destruction. Many pregnant women and newborn babies also lost their lives. So it was indeed very tragic that many innocent lives were lost. Even the lives of newborn babies, unborn babies, and their pregnant mothers were not spared. It was horrifying. But Caspar says that such things must be, which means they are inevitable. They are bound to happen at every famous victory. So he subtly says that although the price was too high, the fact that it was a famous victory justified it. They say it was a shocking sight after the field was won, for many thousand bodies here lay rotting in the sun. But things like that, must be after a famous victory. So after the war ended with the English defeating the French, the aftermath of the war was shocking. The place was strewn with thousands of dead bodies. It was difficult to make arrangements for a proper burial since they were in such large numbers. The bodies were just left there lying in the open and they rotted in the sun. So this was like wiping out every trace of civilized existence that we as men, as human beings, are so proud of. So it was indeed terrible, but such things are an inevitable part of a famous victory. Great praise the Duke of Marlborough won, and our good Prince Eugene. Why, it was a very wicked thing, said little Wilhelmine. Nay, nay, my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. Quoth means said. Caspar says that the Duke of Marlborough, who was the English commander, and Prince Eugene, another successful military commander from Austria, won a lot of praise because of the victory. Now this surprises Wilhelmine, who protests that the battle was a very wicked thing, not at all worthy of praise. But old Caspar admonishes her by saying, "No, no, my little girl, it was a famous victory." And everybody praised the Duke, who this great fight did win. "But what good came of it at last?" quoth little Peterkin. "Why, that I cannot tell," said he, "but it was a famous victory." So Caspar goes on trying to justify the war by saying that everybody praised the Duke because he had won this great fight. Now Peterkin could not make out why the Duke was praised. So he asked, "But in the end, what good came out of the war? What did the war achieve?" Caspar had no answer to this. He replied that he did not know that, but